Hello and welcome to Lion and Mouse Commentary. I'm Holland and this is my best friend Tori.
Hi.
If you're new to our show, we rank various forms of entertainment out of a total score of 10 with only 2 points allowed for our personal taste. But don't worry, we break down everything as we go. Feel free to agree, disagree, or just find something new to enjoy. But be sure to tread lightly, there will be some hot takes and spoilers ahead. And cut to the intro.
Signature.
I know. And I forget like what I say between episodes, so I talked about like a slate at one point.
You did a couple episodes
ago. So, we're just going to talk, I'm just going to cut the intro. Alrighty, so if you couldn't read our title or if you're listening only, today's topic is the book Redwall by the author Brian Jacques. Which that's how you pronounce his name.
Jacques. It's not Jacques.
It is not. He is British. So if you are familiar with this was part of your childhood. You might find some interesting takes on this. This was not blind to me. This was familiar to me. I read these when I was in the age demographic of these books. But this was blind to Tori. She had never read the books, is not familiar with the content at all. So this was new to her. So I am going to give you some background intro of this topic, and then Tori will kick us off into our first category. So if you want some spoiler-free info before you go read the book yourself, here it is. So Redwall is a fantasy novel by Brian Jacques. It was originally published in 1986 and is the first book of the Redwall series. Brian Jacques wrote Redwall after being dissatisfied with the available literature for adolescents, claiming it had too much angst. Wondering what had happened to the magic of classic tales, he wrote his own descriptive story, Redwall, for children attending the Royal School for the Blind in Wavertree, Liverpool, when he was a truck driver in the mid-1980s and he was delivering milk to the school.
Interesting.
In appreciation of his first audience, he made his style of writing as descriptive as possible, quote, painting pictures with words, as he termed it, hoping the school children could engage with his tales in their imaginations. Redwall was originally written on 800 sheets of recycled paper kept in a grocery bag. Jacques' writing gained acclaim when his friend Alan Durban secretly showed it to his own publisher in London, declaring, quote, this is the finest children's tale I've ever read, and you'd be foolish not to publish it, end quote. This event led to a contract for the first 5 books of the Redwall series. The 22nd and final novel was published in May 2011, posthumously after Brian Jacques' death in February 2011 at the age of 71.
Wow. 22 books.
Yeah.
That's quite a bit.
And most of that information I pulled from the Redwall website, so Brian Jacques' website. Redwall won the 1988 Lancashire Library's Children's Book of the Year Award and the Western Australia Young Readers Award. The audiobook won the 1998 Audie Award for Best Children's Title, and the novel was also nominated for the Carnegie Medal. Redwall is also one of the 3 Redwall novels to be made into an animated television series, which was produced by the Canadian studio Nelvana and aired on PBS. It was also adapted into a 2-act children's musical, which premiered in 1998, and was adapted into a graphic novel published in 2007.
Interesting.
It was also adapted into a video game series of 6 episodic adventures and is titled The Lost Legends of Redwall, which was most recently released for the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One in 2019.
What? I didn't know video games. Mm-hmm. I knew about the PBS show, but I didn't know video games. That sounds fun.
Yep. In 2021, Netflix announced an animated film adaptation based on the first book of the series. The development was spearheaded by Over the Garden Wall creator Patrick McHale, who finished the script in 2022, but left the project a month after this announcement. As of the recording of this episode, no further updates have been released.
Oh, wow.
So, it has a lot of variations and adaptations. All right, so here is the synopsis of the book, if you would like to read it for yourself. And this is from redwallabbey.com. As the inhabitants of Redwall Abbey bask in the glorious summer of the late rose, all is quiet and peaceful. But things are not as they seem. Clooney the Scourge, the evil one-eyed rat warlord, is hell-bent on destroying the tranquility as he prepares to fight a bloody battle for the ownership of Redwall. This dazzling story in the Redwall series is packed with all the wit, wisdom, humor, and blood-curdling adventure of the other books in the collection, but has the added bonus of taking the reader right back to the heart and soul of Redwall Abbey and the characters who live there. So there you go. So Tori, I will be interested to hear Tori's opinion because she read this for the first time as an adult, and I read this for the first time as a middle schooler. So Tori's going to kick us off into our first category.
Okay. So for books, our first category is plot, story delivery, and world building. Before I dive too much deeper, I do want to say I found myself not really making that many notes, which I typically make less notes than you. Mm-hmm. You can go look at all of our scanned pages on the website to see that. But I found I made less notes than even more normal. So I may not actually have a ton to say, but that doesn't mean that's not anything negative, by the way. I just want to preface that like my talking points may be kind of short, but I don't mean for that to mean that I don't mean for that to mean anything. Like, just before I jump into that, it doesn't mean anything negative. Okay. So out of 3 points that we allot for plot, story, delivery, and world building, I gave this 2.5 out of 3 points. I thought it was solid. I've never read this book before now. I think reading this as an adult, I absorbed it much differently than I would have if I had read it in my youth. Again, I don't mean that as any sort of negative, but part of me kind of wishes I had read it as a child, because I think that this world, and the way that the plot is kind of unfolded, it has that sort of grand, the word adventurous seems lackluster for what I'm trying to say, but I don't know what word would fit better, but it has this sort of grand, adventurous magic to it that my wizened years of age, I felt like it was there, but I couldn't access it the same way that I would have if I was a kid. So I don't mean for that to sound regretful or sad, but just to acknowledge that almost immediately I realized how much care is obviously put into the building of this world and how it's delivered in a way where somebody in their youth can pick it up and glean so much and it be kind of like one of those really empowering kind of novel series. So all of that to say, I was feeling a little bit of like FOMO as I was reading this, but I'm glad that I'm reading it now. So to really quickly like summarize the plot here. So the plot is not that complicated. It's pretty simple and straightforward. And I like that it's broken into 3 arcs to kind of further orient the reader as to kind of like where we are, how much more do we have left to do. So the plot basically revolves around this young mouse who lives at Redwall Abbey, and his name is Matthias, and he has an admiration for Martin the Warrior, who was a mouse of Redwall history, who at the time had to step up and defend the Abbey. And since then, the Abbey has been in a very peaceful state, and they haven't had need to do anything like that. But then greatness is thrust upon Matthias as the Abbey becomes under attack once again, and Matthias has to step up and take that role that Martin the Warrior had. And so there's a lot of that kind of like parallel characterization. And while we don't focus much on the character of Martin because he's not in the story, he's just alluded to and used as like a historical reference. But it's not just Matthias that steps up either. Everybody at the Abbey and a lot of the surrounding woodland creatures step up to defend the Abbey as well. And so it becomes this very band of brothery kind of vibe with talking animals. And I think it was very reminiscent to me of like that era where Disney was making talking animal movies, and they still felt humanistic and real in that way. So I think of like Robin Hood, like the animated Robin Hood. Those are all talking animals. Aristocats, like those sorts of things. Lady and the Tramp, that there was a era of time where those sorts of stories were really prevalent. And I know that the Redwall series was created in the 80s, like you were stating. And so it kind of feels like a little bit of that resurgence without feeling quite as, I don't want to say shallow as Disney, because I don't necessarily think that Disney films are shallow, but this is deeper than that. The story is deeper and realer in its fantasy than that. But I like that there's this sort of like, I don't want to say cartoony, that's not right, but there's this sort of characterization that comes with the characters being animals, because they're not animals acting as people, they're animals acting as animals, but they have those very distinct humanistic qualities like empathy and compassion and jealousy and rage, and like things that real animals don't really experience in the level that we do.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was really nice. This story is not shallow, but it is easy to follow, which I think is also really helpful, especially because, and I'll talk about this a little bit, I actually put this into plot instead of characters, even though this might sound confusing what I'm about to say, but there are a lot of characters, like 100 of them, and some of them barely mean anything to the overarching story, and some of them are core characters that exist through the whole story, or maybe the act, they're very important for the act that they appear in, etc., etc. And I will admit that one of the slight negatives for me was how difficult at one point it became for me to distinguish who was who, especially in regards to the named like the named rats in Clooney's army. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden they were all the same rat to me. They just had different names.
Yeah.
And so I think some of the small differences that are like kind of given to us about each of them ended up kind of falling by the wayside. So I put this in plot because I think it to me classified a little bit more closely under world building than any negative against the characters themselves. But there are so many of them. At one point I was like, I'm just going to write down every character name. And I got about 15 in and I was like, I'm not doing this.
Yeah.
And I was literally like 40 pages in. And when I was like, I'm not going to actually do that, this would be a crazy long list. But I would wager there's at least 50 or 60 named characters in this book.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
I think so. Yeah.
So what I found funny is, so when I was in film school, I was told that all conflicts that are written fall into one of three categories. I may have mentioned this before, but I think it bears repeating. So all conflicts basically fall under man versus man versus self, or man versus nature. And all conflicts in some way or another can be attributed under one of those three umbrellas. This conflict is definitely traditional man versus man. There's really nothing complicated about that, but I think this animal lens makes it, in a way, for me as a reader, it made it easier for me to root for like the good animals for some reason, because the good animals are presented as good and fair and just, and they're usually kind and gentle. And then you have the very opposite characterization of the bad guys in the book with Clooney and his army, and then they do have a few allies that come in and out, and there are other characters, I'll talk about them a little bit, like the character of Asmodeus, that's very obviously a bad guy, and then you have some characters, which I'll talk about later, that do change. They have character change, and I like that. I'll talk about that in characters. But at the baseline, for me, it felt easier to trust the cute little mouse in the Abbey than it was for me to like root for the nasty rat who kills his own kind when he gets angry. So it sounds almost like it's too obviously handed to you. But in the context of this being an animal world, I had zero problems with that at all. It's like it almost felt like, in a way, it was very true to like the animalistic nature of that animal. And I know that sounds crazy to say that, but it's like, okay, yeah, at the end of the day, these are animals. And again, they have humanistic characteristics that make the story deliverable to us. But it was just very easy for me to root for the good guys in those situations. The world feels humongous by the end of the book. We started out with pretty much the only locale being the Abbey and then the little church down the road. And that was it for like the first 50 or 60 pages. Those were the only locales we had. And by the end of the book, it felt like the map had been like expanded out to here. And now we have all these different locales that we've discovered, and even locales within the Abbey itself that are discovered, you know, and it just made everything feel really, really big at the end. I think that... Actually, I think I'm going to talk about my next point in quality writing, so I'll hold off. I think that there is a really nice merit to the fact that the perspectives switch so much in Act 3. I think some could take this as a negative because it's sometimes literally every chapter that it switches from somebody to somebody to somebody. And in Act 3, there are technically 3 perspectives that we have. We have Matthias and what he's doing. We have what everybody else at the Abbey is doing. And we have what Clooney and his army are doing. And it's pretty much at the beginning of every chapter, we've jumped somewhere else. And I think it could be confusing, but saving that sort of back and forth until Act 3 is the way to do it. Because if you're going to switch all those perspectives, because we do kind of need to know what's going on in all of these locations, if you're going to have to switch that often, that's the time to do it. Because now we've had 2/3 of the book to orient ourselves. And so by the time we're here, we know exactly who's doing what and like what their purpose is at that place and the stakes in each locale and what each person's sort of fighting for at that moment. And I thought that that was really interesting, and I liked that sort of perspective switch. I will be a little honest here, though, and it is that the victory at the end is so insanely satisfying. Insanely satisfying. And then it's over in a page and a half. And I was like, what? We just won! Now we're done? I don't even get to reap the benefits of, like, the peace afterwards. That kind of frustrated me. I'm not going to lie. I wish we had at least gotten 3 to 5 maybe additional pages, one more little tiny chapter. There is an epilogue, okay, but the epilogue is kind of written in like journal or letter format. And so it doesn't, and it's not from the perspective of anybody that we've gotten to know. So I was like, I just felt a little bit cheated out of the end. Like, we worked so hard. We worked 350 pages for this. And now we're done. And we get that victory literally on like page 359 or 349. And then it's over on page 351. And I was like, I just wanted to see everybody happy for a few pages. My bad. But that was...
I will say that I think that improves in subsequent books, but yeah, it is pretty unsatisfying in this one. So,
those 2 small negatives that I listed are really the only reasons that I took half a point off. I think otherwise it's pretty great. So this is why I ended up with 2.5 out of 3 points.
Alrighty, so I agree with a lot of the points you've made. Yeah, so I think kind of to piggyback off a point you kind of mentioned earlier, I think that in creating this world and building this world, I don't think there's anything wrong with kind of capitalizing these archetypes or associations we have to different types of animals. So like foxes are sly, so the foxes are going to be villains, and rats are, you know, dirty vermin, but mice are really cute. And, you know, so I think that there's a lot of relatability, especially for children and young, you know, middle schoolers, school-age children, teenagers. It's easy for them to immediately identify with and root for characters that visually match their character. And so I think that that's quality world building. I think maybe at this point you would look at it and think it's kind of a cheap way out, but I also think that there's a reason that it works. Like there's a reason that, like you said, like as an example, like the Disney Robin Hood is a fox because he's crafty and tricky.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a reason that, you know, the villain in, you know, the villainous animal sidekick in Cinderella is a cat, because we associate those qualities with those animals. And I think that's just good storytelling and world building. I really like overall for plot, story delivery, and world building. I actually gave this 2 out of 3 points. I do think that for children and young people, this story does have that kind of fantastical wonder in it that is maybe not as accessible for adults. But I do like how maybe the words you're looking for, I feel like this story is an epic.
Yeah.
Like it is a tale, like it's an epic of adventure. And so there are some tropey things in this story that are pretty common in children's literature, in adventure stories, in, you know, and much earlier in literature than the 1980s. You know, the main hero goes on a quest. He has these items that he's trying to find. He wants to find, you know, Martin the Warrior's sword. And there are certain riddles that they have to solve along the way. And the, you know, heroes are kind of under siege by these villains. And there's like craftiness and antics and, you know, underhanded play by the villains. And, you know, but so I think all of that is pretty like standard content for a story set in kind of the Middle Ages era, time, fantasy world. So not all of those things are really new to these kinds of stories, but they're also what kids want to read and the kind of story that will captivate a young audience's attention. So I can't fault it too much for having very common story components that are found in this style of literature, in this type of world, and to this audience. So I didn't take off a ton of points for that, but I did have to objectively admit, like, we have kind of heard these similar stories before, just this similar tale. I do think, though, what makes this story very different from a lot of common stories, and I think especially in more modern tellings of story, is we have our heroes versus our villains, so our man versus man, like you said, but we don't have Matthias versus the world. Mm-hmm. And he's the only one capable of protecting his home, which I think is a very individualistic hero's tale, where he's the chosen one. I mean, he kind of is the chosen one, if you will, but in this story, what I think makes it so good is this is a story about villains against a community of people, and a community of good trying to protect not just their home, their brick and mortar abbey, but the encroachment of evil upon their world as a whole. And that's a much broader scope and a more complex tale than what I think is typically found in Matthias is going to kill the bad guy at the end. So I like that. I think that makes it more complex. I do think that the fact that just in dealing with a community of people, they're all like-minded towards one goal, which is, you know, peace and prosperity and kindness to others. But the way that they go about that can be very different. And I'll talk about this a little bit in characters as well, but I like how, for example, the abbot's perspective on how to maintain peace and Constance's perspective of how to maintain peace are very different. And yet they are allowed to have their differing opinions and work in their own strengths towards that same goal, and yet not violate their own convictions or giftedness. So I'll talk about that more in characters, but I think overall as a plot and developing a whole story with those 3 different perspectives we have, specifically following Matthias and then following the abbey that's under siege, we get to explore and experience, and the audience gets to find people that they identify with in some of those different roles. Not everybody has to be the warrior on a quest to successfully fight evil and defeat the bad guys. You know, you can just be, you know, healing sick people or making food or, you know, defending the abbey or stealing the tapestry back. There's multiple roles needed in a community. And so this very community perspective of our heroes, I think, is very, very unique to this kind of story. I do think I did mention, like you said, how we have these three different plots where we're following Matthias, we're following the Abbey, and then we're following the villains, and the way that it switches between the two. I think it does a great job of building intensity, because I think a lot of stories would follow our heroes and not give us the perspective of the villain. So we don't have this. You can have tension built in your story by not knowing what your enemy's doing, but I think this story effectively builds tension in telling us what our enemy is up to and what they're thinking and how, like, ruthless they really are, and that adds tension to our narrative. But overall, I think the stakes of the story are really high. It's really easy to follow. I think we can't I'll talk about this in quality of writing as well, but in building the world, the description and the evocative way that the story is told, the descriptions of the environment, of the food, of the people, it's all done very well. I think that really makes it an immersive story versus just telling us individual plot lines moving from point A to point B and these things happening. We're actually getting descriptions of the world as a whole. And so I kind of consider that in world building as well as quality of writing. One thing, though, I did think there are some pacing issues in this story, specifically when Matthias is with the sparrows. I love that as a character moment. I love that as building the world, but I do felt like it took way too long. It just kind of stagnated his part of the story. I think the part where with Martin and his kind of like spirit, if you will, question mark, it's not really made clear as to what's happening, you know, dreams that people are having or voices people are hearing or things they're kind of, you know, getting these senses, or why Clooney seems to have these nightmares, or, you know, all of that is not very clear. And I think that, kind of like we talked about before, if we're going to have magic or fantastical things happen, it helps to know what the rules are and why this is happening. And because this story was written as kind of a standalone story in its conception, I think we did need a little something. Just an explanation from someone would have given us a little bit more. Maybe Methuselah could have said, you know, that something has happened before. People have had, you know, dreams, or, you know, there's a way I think that we could have had, you know, Matthias be the chosen one, if you will, which is a really big trope. But I think we could have had him be like the successor of like Redwall's next line of warriors without being related to Martin. I think we could have had some kind of rule that we could have just connected that in at some point that made sense. And I think that we didn't really get anywhere. It's like we had this hat we know can hang on a peg somewhere on the wall, but we just had nowhere to really put it by the end of it. We had some vague ideas, and maybe that was the intent, was to keep it really vague and let the reader kind of interpret it as on their own. But I think that that's a really leaving it up to your own interpretation is typically for a much older audience, and I don't think that's necessarily reflective in this. So I personally thought that there could have been a little bit more clarity. Also, I thought the final battle between Matthias and Asmodeus is a little tough to understand what's going on. With Brian Jacques' visual description of the world and the environment, it's done very, very clearly, and I felt like this climactic battle, it was very unclear exactly what was happening. There's a part mentioned, I didn't write it all down, but it was
to reference it?
Unclear. No. Just the logistics of it. It was like Matthias like dug into a hole or like moved around in the earth, but in this cave, but he used the point of his sword to dig a hole a little
wall.
But how,
and the
like,
shrew went through, and then he like pulled Matthias through. Yeah.
Right. So it just all seemed very difficult for me to mentally picture. So that part, and it's like this big climactic battle. So I felt like it should have been very, very clear, even if we needed a few extra pages to kind of really describe that effectively. The other part with that, I did feel like there was a little bit of a use the Force Luke moment in that part of the story as well, which I personally thought was a little corny, but as a kid, I probably thought it was, amazing. But as a kid, I was like, oh, I mean, as an adult, I was like, oh, we just kind of had a little Star Wars moment here.
Yeah.
But I think it's kind of hard to not have a Star Wars moment because it's so ingrained into Western culture at this point.
Yeah.
But overall, I think it's done really well. I like how the villains are actually evil. They're not just like misunderstood bad guys. We're witnessing the kind of underhanded, sneaky, sly, murderous deeds that they're doing amongst each other, rather not even considering like good versus evil. Like it's evil versus evil because they can't even be good to each other. I also like how this really isn't, I feel like it could have been very easy to make this like a war story that Matthias is going out and he's going to come back and just like slay the dragon at the end. And it's really not. It's much more complex. There's everybody involved in the story has usefulness and purpose. All these characters were introduced to have a reason to be there. Whatever role they function, even if it's a minor role, still has value. And so I really appreciate that we didn't just build this whole world with all these people and then they all just kind of sit there and watch Matthias save the world. I like how we have this very wide scope and a very well integrated scope of all of our characters, which I did attribute to characters as well. So overall, I think it's done very, very well. At this point, reading it in 2025, which is when we're releasing this episode, I do think a lot of aspects of this story are very familiar to most people in the fantasy genre and especially even in children's media. But I think this does a really good job of fleshing it out, rounding it out, giving you a fresh take on it, and doing it in a really high quality way versus just trying to, rush out a quick hit story. So 2 out of 3 for me.
Okay, so our next category for books is quality of writing. We allot 1 point for this, and I gave this half a point. So this is actually where I attributed the pacing, and which I do think is a bit of a negative. I think there are some. I don't think that there are necessarily any moments that are unnecessary, but I do think that there are many moments that are too long. And I think what and this has been true for me for a couple years now, is like a lot of books I find hard. It's just hard for me to sit and focus on a book, and pacing has a lot to do with that. This book took me longer than it should have to read, not because I was not enjoying myself, but because I felt like I was just doing the same thing for half an hour when I wanted to be moving along. And that is one problem that I think is very indicative of this. Now, I think that all the story the story delivery is great. The world building is great. The characters are great. I'll talk about that later. But everything is just moving at like 5 miles an hour. And then we have scenes that run at 50 miles an hour for 5 pages. And then we're back to 5 miles an hour. And I wish that we'd had either more variation of pacing, or we just never go back down to 5. Like, maybe you have 5 to your first few chapters because you're setting up characters and orienting the reader and all those things, sure. But then we need to hit 10, and then we need to hit 15. And then sure, we can ramp it up, but then we need to bring it back down to like 20. And so what I found was there were some moments where I felt like I should have been more tense about what was going on, but I just wasn't, because we'd been tense for like too many pages at this point, right, or too many chapters. So I do think that the pacing is a little bit of a problem, and that's kind of where I'm talking about it here. Now, I do think that the vocab in this book is impressive, especially for the age demographic that it is meant for, but I do not think it at all is not age appropriate. I think it's very age appropriate, but I also love that we're introducing vocab words to 12-year-olds that probably have never seen a majority of these words before. And I like where they're placed a lot of the time because they're placed in a context that sort of gives you the meaning as it's saying the word. So, you know, I'm at this is another one of those things where I got a little bit of FOMO because I'm like, at my age, I know what all these words are, but I think they would have felt very exotic to me if I was reading these as a young girl, for the first time. Not like I could tell you how old I was every time I heard a new word, you know, so, but at this point in my life, I'd heard all of them, that were used in the book, but I'm certain that as a preteen, I hadn't. So, like, part of me is kind of like, dang, I wish that this would have been the time where I like, what is that? You know, I've never heard that word before.
Well, I think a lot of adults that read this book would not recognize a lot of the words.
Okay, well, maybe I just made myself sound really full of myself.
No, I think they're not words for people that grew up reading like classic literature. Yes. But for people that grew up reading, and
there's certainly not vocab words that we are using in today's society.
Knocking, you know, your YA fiction, but yeah. I think most of those like modern stories, cough, cough, Twilight, are not using words like this. I wrote some of them down.
Okay, so I'll leave that to you then. But I liked that there was this great use of vocab without it ever feeling like haughty or flowery. Like it never felt like it was like, I know more words than you kind of vibe from the author, which I have read books that feel like that, where I'm like reading a book and I'm like, wow, this author really threw in every word that they knew.
They just pulled the thesaurus out.
It's like, can you please lower that down? No, everything felt very intentional and very purposeful. And it was like, in reading it, it's like, okay, that's an unusual vocab word. I don't see that every day. But yet, I can't think of any word that would fit better. You know what I mean? So I liked that. Now, something I'm very torn about, and this was ultimately why I ended up giving this half credit, is there are very distinct accents given to different animal races. The sparrows and the moles and the shrews, they all have, and so on and so forth. They all have these very distinct accents. And from a story delivery world building point, love it. From a character perspective, awesome. But for quality of writing, this is probably where, if I had been reading this at 12 years old, I would have been the most frustrated. Because as a grown adult, I'm reading some of these heavily accented, phonetically spelled words, thinking to myself, I have no idea what the Mr. Formal just said. Literally have no idea what happened.
You're taking points away
from
the dialogue? Wow.
No, I'm taking points away for the accents being so phonetically spelled, leaned so far into, that it's difficult to figure out what each word is supposed to be. And I found that to be difficult.
Did you really?
Ways. I did.
I didn't have any issue with it.
I had issues mostly with the moles. I think the mole talk was the most difficult for me. And I will not lie, some lines I just completely skipped.
Did you try reading it aloud?
Yes.
And you still couldn't catch it?
Still could not understand some of what they were saying. Like, I could get the general gist, but like, if I were to repeat it to you in like plain English, I'm not confident that I could get every word correct. Mm-hmm. The sparrows were not as difficult. It was mostly, for them, it was mostly grammar. Yeah. Not so much different phonetic spelling. Although I found it funny that they didn't call themselves sparrows; they called themselves sparrows, which I thought was fun. But I think that this is probably going to be maybe my most controversial take, because I think it's going to depend on what kind of reader you are and what kind of Redwall fan you are. Because if you are a pre-established fan, which I am not, then this might be something where you're like, I'm gonna die on this hill. This is important. It needed to be spelled, this phonetically. It needed to be leaned into this hard. And that's fine. You're entitled to that opinion. But for me, I found it difficult too often to the point where if I would rather just skip the line than put the effort in, that's difficult for me to get past. So all of that saying, I 0.5 point out of 1 for quality of writing.
Alrighty. Well, we're going to get all the Redwall fans in our comments hating on you.
Sorry.
Not really. I think that's a valid critique. I don't agree, but I think it's still valid.
That's fine.
So for quality of writing, I give this full points. So 1 out of 1. I actually really like the dialogue. It's one of my favorite things about the story because I think it's so clever and I can just hear them in my head, like exactly the way they're supposed to sound. And if you listen to the audiobooks, it's even more fun because the actors that read the dialogue do a great job. So shameless plug for your local library to go check out an audiobook. No, but overall, I think the vivid imagery of the world is just really, really well written in this story. It's written more like classic literature than typical children's novels, YA novels, like kids' storybooks. I think it's a great, I called it this. I don't know, this is not a term that I know of, but I think it's great storyteller's prose. It's readable if you're reading it, but it's a great cadence for reading aloud. I think that the way the sentences are structured together, the way that the dialogue is written, the way that the balance between description and dialogue, when dialogue is, when dialogue is like sandwiched in a paragraph and there's like descriptive language around like a line of dialogue, or, a sentence spoken by a character. And then there will be sentences where it's literally just dialogue back and forth and you've already established who these characters are and you're just clipping back and forth between the two. I think there's great balance between different types of dialogue. It doesn't feel like you're reading just a script back to back with no describing or adjectives in between, or world building in between. I think the composition of the story is great for reading aloud. I think it's really well reflected in this story specifically, that this was written originally, it was designed and written for children who couldn't see, because you can imagine everything that's described to you. This is smells of the food versus just the way they look versus how something would taste in different combinations, things like that. It's all really, really creative. I also think this does a really good job of the third person narrative. So if you've listened to our prior episodes on All the Wrong Questions series, I really critique hard the lack of use of first person narrative in those Lemony Snicket stories. But I think in this story specifically, it's an excellent use of third person narrative. We still get this kind of overhead view of what's going on. We get kind of like a close-up view of, like, if you imagine a camera, like a film, like we get this, like we get wide shots, we get narrow shots, we get close-ups, and then we still get kind of like an over-the-shoulder personal perspective of one individual with their inner monologue or their thoughts that they're going through. So we get these very dynamic snapshots of what's going on in our world, and we might be following Matthias as an individual. We might be watching the whole Abbey members working together on something. We might be watching two weasels arguing with each other. And I think it does a really good job of setting up those different scenes and giving you enough variety that you're not bored. I do agree with pretty much everything you said about the pacing, but I attributed that into the plot. I think there are definitely parts where this drags, so I don't disagree with you on that, but I just took my points off in plot.
Yeah.
I do think that some description, although it's done really, really well, so not necessarily in the plot of what's happening to our characters and what's happening to the world, but in just describing maybe the food that's on the table. I don't need 3 paragraphs of food description. Yeah, it's all great. It's done really well. It's nice, but let's move on.
Too much.
Or I don't need a description of, one room that the character is sitting in before they start talking to another character. So I do feel like it's not perfect, but I didn't think that those moments of, poetry and prose specifically were lackluster enough to remove points for just the quality of writing as its own objective standard. But I do think there are parts where the plot suffers, and so that's why I kind of attribute it any flaws in the plot momentum from the writing style. I really put that in more so in plot. The vocabulary words, you kind of touched on it already. I do think they're really great vocabulary words, and to be honest, I think that the quality of books that most people read in their day-to-day is not as structurally dense as some of this book may appeal to some people, or people may perceive this book as. So I think a lot of words, I mean, I could, at a minimum, in the context of what was being said, decipher what these words meant. But if you asked me, what's the definition of that word? There were some I couldn't tell you. I could tell you what it means based on what's going on in the story. But if you asked me in a spelling bee how to spell the word and what the definition is, I probably couldn't tell you exactly what that word means based on in the dictionary. And I think that it's great vocabulary building for, middle grade students, but even some adults I think could benefit from just the way that this story is written. I think it's written very well. And so I as an adult did have some plot moments where I felt like we were kind of dragging, but as far as the way that the work was written and structured, I felt like I was getting kind of a breath of fresh air in reading something that was higher quality than just your average novel that I would read for entertainment. I felt like I was definitely more reading literature in reading this story. So that's the biggest reason I gave it full points. So 1 out of 1.
Okay. So the third category for books is characters, and we also allot 3 points here. And I gave this full points.
Wow.
I think this is really, really, really where the charm of this book lies. I talked about my one character struggle in plot and story delivery, in that there are so many of them, but every single one of them feels like a real person in a real story with a real reason to be there. Nothing, even the nameless or too many soldiers in Clooney's army, they're all there for a purpose, and we may never see some of the names of some of them, but like I felt like everybody there felt like they needed to be there and had a purpose for being there. There's this very clear establishment of good and evil sides. I know I already talked about this, but I thought it was also interesting that the naming schemes of characters are also pretty indicative of what side they are on. Mm-hmm. Somebody named Cheese Thief is probably not going to be a good guy.
Probably a bad guy.
You know what I mean? And then somebody like Cornflower is probably not a bad guy. And so I liked that their names truly felt like reflections of the character. I'm talking the substance of the character. Mm-hmm. And I really liked that. I found that to be a nice additional touch because, I think this is probably more so in other cultures, but like, have you ever heard, I know that in some cultures it's very important where like people say like your name is a reflection of you. Mm-hmm. And so, expecting parents put a ton of thought into creating or choosing a name based on meaning. And I think that's how these characters feel, is it feels like they have been named because of who they are. They're not created and then given a name, which I just found really interesting and nice. I liked that sort of thing. Matthias is a great protagonist. He's likable. You want to root for him. He's not perfect. He has moments of anger and sorrow and pouting and maybe too much ego. He has all these very normal, like human emotion moments where he's not necessarily the most composed or perfect person, and yet he steps up every time he needs to. And he's just very likable. And I mean, look at him. He's so cute. He's so little, but that doesn't stop him. He's gonna save Redwall. And I think one thing about Matthias is I found myself forgetting sometimes that he's a teeny tiny little mouse because he feels so much bigger than himself.
Yeah.
And I think that that's just so nice to see, of like, your protagonist, it doesn't really matter what they're like physically. What matters is like what they're made of and who they are. And those are characteristics of Matthias that make him just so easy, and also easy for the reader to put our trust in him. We're putting a lot of trust in this teeny tiny little mouse, and he doesn't let us down. And I think that's one of the things that's just so nice about that, is that sometimes I get tired of the protagonist being so flawed that like the whole story is like a big redemption arc. There's a time and place for that. I'm not saying that that's always a bad thing, but sometimes I get a little tired of that. Like the I'm not like other girls, or I'm not like other boys trope, which we've talked about on this show. But Matthias does not fall into that. He is not. He is humble, and he has moments of doubt, but he also has moments like, oh heck yeah, I'm doing awesome. And so it just it feels like a real thing. We have moments where our emotions change based on whatever, and sometimes we have these moments of insecurity that we don't necessarily need to, or we have moments where we're feeling maybe a little too good about ourselves. And so all of that just felt very natural, and none of it at the same time felt contradictory to each other either. Matthias I never had this moment where I was like, but 5 pages ago you were sad. Yes, well, sometimes 5 minutes ago I was sad too, and now I'm not. I'm fine. And so it's like, it doesn't mean that I'm contradicting myself as a person. It just means that emotions ebb and flow the way that everything else is. But at the core, Matthias stays consistent. His goal stays consistent. His motivation stays consistent. All of the things that matter the most stay consistent in our protagonist. So I really love him. I could talk about every character. I'm not going to, because there's so many.
There are a lot.
I'm just gonna hit some highlight characters. Clooney is hateable in every way. He is hateable by his own army, and we see examples of that. He's obviously nobody at the Abbey is the fan of him, but also I find it so interesting how Clooney strikes fear into his own army more often than he strikes fear into the members of the Abbey and their neighbors. And I think that it sort of reflects this overall idea that living your life under the umbrella of fear truly turns you into a weaker person. And that maybe I'm digging too hard.
No, I don't think so.
But as I was reading the book and seeing how easily swayed by the wind of circumstance, wow, that was poetic, Clooney and his army are, and then you look at the people here at the Abbey that are defending the Abbey, which I'll talk about some of them too, and how things do not always go their way. In fact, they often don't. And yet they stay positive, and they adapt, and they work together, and everybody's voice matters. And because of that, plans are created and improved upon. And that's so different than Clooney and his army. Whereas Clooney's perspective is, I'm the only one smart here. You will listen to me. I have no room for grace for mistakes. You die if you make a mistake. And at the end, that becomes their downfall. And Clooney always is throughout the whole thing, he has this point that he always brings up, and it's that we are a trained and organized army. And yet that did you no good, because everybody is just living in this constant state of fear and anger and rage and greed and all of these moral pillars that do nothing but bring destruction. And that is satisfying at the end to see that these character pillars never hold up. And yet the character pillars that we see in Matthias, in Constance, in the Abbot, in, Basil Stag Hare, and characters like that, they're opposite character pillars, moral pillars. All of that to say, the moral pillars are made so obviously different, and yet it's very satisfying at the end to see what crumbles and what doesn't. And it sounds like a trope. It sounds like a cliche, but I love this laying out of good prevails and how that translates directly to the morals of the character, the choices of each character, and how I just think that was a wonderful way to reflect that. I want to talk about Constance the Badger for a second. She is one of my favorite characters. She is absolutely wonderful. She's big and she's strong and she's hardy and she loves that abbey and she loves the people in it. And her appearance does not match her heart, which I think is a good thing because she is stated to be the only character that Clooney and his army really fear in the Abbey, and I think that's necessary for them as a defense mechanism. But every single decision that Constance makes is for the good of the Abbey, and she's so consistent in this way, and she never uses her strength or mass as a point of ego or demanding that her opinion or her way be done. And I think that that's just so admirable of a character. And, she takes on many, many, many roles and jobs throughout the defense of the Abbey, from full-on offense to full-on defense to first aid to feeding people. Like, Constance is one of those characters where she can do it all, and she will. And no job is too big and no job is too small. And she's one of the few characters that has the physical capability to fill that role, because, that the abbot or Methuselah they would want to step into that offensive role, but they can't. But Constance can. And so she will, because she doesn't want to put those who would be at risk in that position if it's not necessary. And so I just love that she's so consistent in that way, where it's like, it's never about her in her head. It's never about Constance. It's about, how can I help the people that are around me, and how can I strengthen their morale and use their talents to the best of my ability? I'll fill the hole. And I just love that about Constance. So, Basil Stagg-Hare is a really fun character. I like that he is not present from the beginning, because I think he makes such a loud entrance that he becomes very memorable very fast. And I also love that he has this sort of militaristic background, and he's got all the fun stories from the war, but he's not like a hardened or bittered war vet. He's kind of like a chummy old chap who's just happy to be here, and he's a little brash sometimes with his words. He has no filter, but he never really says anything that I would say is outright cruel. He just maybe doesn't read the room very well sometimes, but I think it really lends more of a humor to anything than like a rudeness. He's never really rude. But he's a fun character. I like seeing how he sort of gets very close with Jess Squirrel, who's another character that's very interesting to me. And, another thing about the squirrels, I'm kind of bouncing here, but the squirrel family is very interesting because we meet Silent Sam first, who is the little baby who doesn't talk. And he holds his own as well in the defense of the Abbey and helps out Matthias. And then his parents come in, and it's interesting to see a family where the father isn't necessarily the big character of the family, and Mr. Squirrel is perfectly content, just tell me what to do. Tell me what to do and I'll do it. He's kind of like Constance in that way, where he's like, I'll just fill the hole. But Jess, the mother of the Squirrel family, she becomes kind of like the star of the family, in that she is established pretty early on to be like the best climber in the area, and she proves that again and again, and she becomes a vital person to rely on when having to retrieve things or bait enemies, and she and Basil both kind of like take that role very well, but they're very different personalities, and I found that fun. Again, so many characters I could touch on. I'm going to talk about one more character, and it was a character who became my favorite character because I think she has such a wonderful change of heart, and that's the character of Warbeak the Sparrow, where she just did what she was instructed to do, which is to protect the sparrow habitat, territory, whatever. And she's ended up captured by the Abbey and as such treated as a captive for a while. And then she eventually ends up leading or helping lead Matthias back to her home, which is up in like the eaves and rafters of the Abbey. And that section, once they're finally up in the Sparrow territory, I agree with you from what you said earlier. It's kind of long, but I love how natural her change is toward Matthias and toward all of the people. And then Matthias's heart changes toward her and her mother, seeing the sort of situation that they live in. And they're under an abusive regime of a king sparrow. And now they want to mutually benefit each other. Now they want to mutually help each other because they truly can see the sincerity in each other and their goal. And now they're realizing that it's not you that's my enemy. It's this. And we just happened to cross at the wrong time. And I loved that character change in Warbeak, and how as Matthias helps her and her mother to take down their oppressive leader, she helps him to escape, and then shows up later as she's been crowned queen of the Sparrows at that point, which we don't see that, but we hear it from her later when she comes back in. And now she's ready to bring her whole command to the help of the Abbey. And that is the exact kind of change of heart that I like to see. It wasn't a crazy, like, oops, I've changed moment. It was a genuine and natural progression of a change of heart. And that's the best kind of character change, I think, in any sort of storytelling. I could go on, but I'm not going to, because I feel like I've already talked for a really long time after I said I probably wasn't going to talk for a very long time. So I'm just going to leave this with 3 points out of 3 for characters and let you take the floor now.
Good job. So for me, for characters, I actually gave this 2 out of 3. So I know, shocking. Overall, I do have a lot of positives. I agree with the majority of the points you've said. But I don't think, and maybe it's tough to read this story. I can't go back and like read it for the first time. So it's tough to like read this story without the knowledge or the memories of like other books in the story. So I think I'm kind of comparing apples to apples there, because I think that this story is like the hallmark story of the Redwall series, but I feel like the books and the stories and the characters just get better. And so I feel like compared to some of the other books in the series that are my favorites, this one I was kind of like, I mean, it's okay. It's a good start. It's kind of how I felt reading it. And that may be just like my personal perspective of it, but I do think it's tough to I can't unsee what I know about other stories. So overall, I really love this cast in this story. I think it's a fabulous cast. I'll talk a little bit about, I agree with your points on Matthias. I love that he's very clever and heroic without being overly or unrealistically competent. He didn't come out of the onto stage, interstage right as, I am already the Redwall Abbey warrior. I already have this wonderful abilities that nobody else has.
The most impressive thing that Matthias does before having to step up is catch a big fish.
And he didn't do that by himself. Yeah. He did it with, what was it, Brother Alf?
Yeah.
So I think that the journey he goes on grows his skills that we already kind of see him start to have at the beginning. And then it also highlights his strengths and his weaknesses. So we don't just go and we just watch Matthias like win every battle moving forward. He does have those moments where we see he has these moments of weakness or he has flaws, but yet those flaws don't immediately make him unlikable or contradict the character that we've seen in him. I think he's a very noble character, and that kind of noble goodness stays at his core throughout the whole story. I love his relationship with Warbeak. You kind of already touched on that. I think it's a great... It's like two different kinds of warriors coming together and having that mutual core of, justice and rightness and protection for the people they love. And that's their common bond. And yet they have like a word of honor and the code of ethics that they both kind of hold to. And that's where they both find that common ground. So I'm not going to go over that. I think you touched on that really, really well. I also like how our characters are just gradually introduced as we go. So we have our Abbey cast of characters, which we then kind of dig deeper into as the story goes. And then Matthias, who's leaving his home and is meeting new people as he goes, even with Warbeak, which I would say is like outside the Abbey. But these people that he meets and then allies that he gains, we kind of are introduced to them really well, and they're kind of like integrated into the fold. And because we've established Matthias as such a good protagonist, we understand why he's able to appeal to all these people who have vastly different perspectives and they're coming from different places, but yet they all are like, yeah, we live in the woods too. We don't want it overrun by these villains. So it's all very, very believable in why all of these eclectic groups of species of animals would want to kind of join together. I do think that the kind of painting with broad strokes here, because like you said, there are tons of characters. I love that these characters are cross-generational. We don't have just a gang of Avenger kids working together. We have the Abbot, we have Methuselah, we have Constance, we have Matthias, we have, people the age of his parents, and then we have Silent Sam and, all these young characters. And so I love how we have this kind of cross-generational group of people that are our heroes together. And I think it's, again, kind of goes back to what I talked about before, the kind of themes of community and this perspective of community and we live together, and yet we're all very different. And we have this, big village that we have to have this hive mind, together. We all have to think alike and do alike and all have the same purpose. Like everybody in the Abbey, we're all healers. That's all we do. It's like, no, we're all very different. And so I kind of thought about mentioning this in plot too, but it's like you have the Abbot who is like a straight pacifist. Like he is not going to lift a stick to hurt anybody because that violates his conscience. But then you have people like Basil and Jess and Constance who are like, these are villains and we have a right to defend ourselves. And in defending ourselves, we also are protecting the rest of Mossflower. And the Abbot doesn't say, well, I am morally superior to you because I am a pacifist. That's never the direction or the intent of the book. It's just he views things differently and he's following his own convictions. And yet they kind of look at him and go, you're the Abbot, this is your Abbey kind of thing. And he basically says, you do what you need to do. What you're doing, we are both on the side of right and good. And if what you need to do to get that done is to protect yourselves and to pick up a staff and, shoot a arrow or whatever that looks like, then do it. I won't, because that's not what I believe I can do. In good conscience, I'll heal people that are sick and I will take care of people that are wounded, but you do what you need to do. And that's such an uncommon, I feel like most stories today take either one side or the other. They say we have to be a pacifist because that's the morally superior, that's the high ground. And if you're not a pacifist, then you are somehow morally inferior because you want to hurt somebody. Or if you're a pacifist, you're weak, and that's morally inferior because you're weak-minded. And here, I think this story with these characters, we have this wide group of people who all find usefulness and importance and value amongst each other, not just from the author or audience perspective, but even amongst each other, that we don't have to all think alike. We can have like unity of at our core, and what that looks like for each of us may be different, but we're all still functioning towards the same goal, which is, you know, goodness and rightness and nobility and, you know, whatever other virtue you could name. And I just think that's done really well. And it's not presented in a slanted or, you know, one-sided way. So I think that's great for this demographic, but I think it's just great, powerful storytelling. I think that even in that same vein, all of these heroes are heroes. Even if Cornflower and Silent Sam are bringing food to the people watching, you know, on guard duty on the towers at night, that's valuable. And I think that one thing that in Brian Jacques' stories in general, he's like, these people got to eat. Even the person cooking down in the kitchen has value, because this person standing watch on the Abbey wall, he's got to eat something. He's going to be hungry, you know, so I'm doing my part to contribute. Even if that part isn't, you know, shooting an arrow, it still has value to the community as a whole. And I think that that's just really well reflected in this story. Likewise, I do think that the villains have a very unique perspective, in the sense, kind of like what you talked about. I think that it's very uncommon in children's literature to either make your villains these sympathetic characters who are just misunderstood and we should feel sorry for them, or put them up as a cardboard cutout of he's bad, just believe me. And this story does a really good job of showing you, not telling you, why these villains are villainous, and also showing you the self-destructiveness of evil. And like how you said, like the way that their whole, not motivation, I guess you could call it motivation, but their whole propulsion is just out of fear of their leader. But also you watching these like alleged, you know, lieutenants backbite and backstab
so much
and
infighting.
power play against each other, and that ends up with bad consequences. And so I think that that's very uncommon, that this villainy only ends in defeat, but also self-destruction.
Yeah.
And so that self-destructiveness, I feel like, is not commonly covered in children's stories, because I think that authors or filmmakers or whoever think kids are too dumb to understand that concept. But I think this is proof that it can be understood by a younger audience. I think that Clooney, as a true villain, I like he has no tragic backstory. He's, you know, he's evil, he's heartless, he's murderous. I think that this story, if you're wanting your kids to read this story, like, you might want to preview some of it first, because it's pretty dark. These villains are
pretty violent,
very violent, and they're pretty evil. I mean, and it's not mincing. I mean, it's not like R-rated, but it could be, if, you know, your kid was a little more sensitive, it could be PG-13 to that child.
Yeah. And
so, you know, the way that they talk to each other and the way that they kind of backstab each other and trick each other, it's very dark, and that's what evil is. And so I like that these villains truly are villains. They're not just like these slap happy, silly, you know, comic relief villains. They're pretty evil. It gives us a good conflict for our heroes to go up against. And then I really like the way that Clooney is kind of his own undoing. He's losing his own mind. He's deranged. He becomes his own undoing, just like his whole horde becomes their own undoing. Now they're still defeated by our heroes, which is nice. I like that there's no cop out, that our heroes didn't actually have to do anything because they just, imploded on themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But I do like that, crime doesn't pay, if you will. And then I think that our other villains, other than kind of Clooney's rat and, rat horde, the characters of Sayla and Chicken Hound are very interesting. You don't know if these are like
no loyalty, self-serving.
Yep, exactly. You don't know, are they really on Clooney's side? Are they on their own side? We don't really know. So I think they're very interesting when we kind of bring them in for that extra dynamic. And then I think Shadow as a character is scary.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he's a scary villain, and it allows Clooney to stay this like figurehead, and yet we still have this almost even more menacing character kind of coming into the story. So I think all of those keep the story very dynamic without it just being a bunch of bumbling idiots kind of at the gate for the whole story. So that kind of falls into plot 2. The reason I did not give this full points is because I do think that there is some growth. For example, with Warbeak and the Sparrows, and like you mentioned how Warbeak and Matthias, their relationship between each other, there's some growth and change in that. But other than that, I don't think that our main characters have a lot of growth and change. I think the story just reveals more about what's already there. I think our characters are kind of the diamond that's being polished, and not necessarily the coal being turned into a diamond, if that makes sense. And so I think that there's a lot happening in this story. There's a lot of characters. We couldn't have every single one of them have a growth arc. But I think even for Matthias as our main character, we kind of watch him come into his own. But I think that his own was there the whole time. And we don't really see him press against a struggle to precipitate change in him. We just watch him press against the struggle to show what was already at his core, and it just shines a little bit more brighter at the end. And that may be kind of nitpicky, but I do think that he would have been a stronger protagonist if we watched this kind of shift in his character develop more into, like, to just have more of an arc or more of a growth versus just kind of that unveiling of his character. And I think that's pretty true of most of our characters, even Clooney. Like, he's a deranged, like, nut job at the beginning, and then we slowly see, like, he's lost his mind. He's just gone crazy. He was crazy at the beginning. Mm-hmm. We just didn't see it till the end. Mm-hmm. We didn't watch him change into or lose his mind or become mad, if you will. We just knew he was wacky from the beginning, and something wasn't right with this guy, and now, okay, we've just unveiled more of what was already there. So I do wish there was a little bit more growth. And then I also think in general, I think you could object from an objective standpoint, and I don't particularly like saying this because I do really enjoy this book. I do think, although it's a great, like, world building, I do think we set up all these characters as to who they are right at the beginning, and then they're completely predictable through the rest of the story. I think Sayla and Chicken Hound are a little bit of an exception because there's a bit of ambiguity at the start. But then once you think about, like, oh, well, they're foxes and they're hanging out with Clooney first, they're probably not good guys. So there's not a lot of subterfuge of your expectations. And so I think that I'm glad there's not a huge plot twist, or twist villain, because I think that's overdone at this point. But I do wish my expectations in these characters of who's good and who's bad was a little bit more ambiguous versus straight out of the gate. I know this rat's a bad guy. this fox is shady, this mouse is a good guy, this, mole is good. So I wish there was a little bit more gray. I guess you could argue that the sparrows and the shrews are a little bit gray, but very quickly they kind of latch onto our hero's side. And I think that it would have been a little bit more interesting and more depth of character if maybe one or two had a little bit, they weren't so immediately identifiable as these people are going to be heroes or these people are going to be villains. So that is, and the overall character arc is the reason I didn't give it full points. And again, that might be just me being nitpicky. But I do think objectively there could be improvement on these characters. And again, it's tough for me to wipe my mind of other stories because I know Brian Jacques has that caliber as an author to do more and to even dig deeper with his characters. But I think for the first book of the series and this being his first work, I think it's done really, really well. So 2 out of 3 for me.
Okay. So our fourth category is personal taste and preference. You're probably used to this category if you've watched any of our other episodes. So we allot 2 points for our personal taste and preference. I gave this 1 out of 2 points. The world seems overwhelmingly large to me. I think that this probably comes down to the fact that if I were to try to step into this world now, I think it would feel too big. Not to say I won't give it a shot, but right now, I'm not sure that I plan to read the whole series, even though I enjoyed this book a lot. I cried at the end. So, it was not a lack of enjoyment, but I feel like I would be way more gung-ho to read 22 novels if I was 12 years old, and I have so much time. At this point in my life, the idea of reading 22 novels seems overwhelming. Such a commitment. So I'm not saying I'm not going to do it, but right now I don't have the drive to just let me just get through all of it. Which is why I gave it half points. It's hard because it's this book I really enjoyed, but I'm satisfied. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And that's not to say that, a year from now or even 6 months from now or a month from now, I might go, you know what, actually, let me just keep going. But I don't feel like I am here to commit to that. Like I would to other book series where I'm just, raving mad for the next installment. Let me have that. So it's not anything negative, other than, maybe I just hate being a grown-up, which, is negative in its own way.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there are probably other stories and other worlds that I would be way more likely to jump into and finish. Right now, I don't feel the push to do that. So I'm going to just give it 1 point out of 2.
Alrighty. So for me, for personal taste and preference, I gave this 2 out of 2 points. So the Redwall books were some of my favorite growing up. And so because of that, this book holds a special place in my childhood. But I was also very surprised how much I enjoyed reading this as an adult. It felt like a breath of fresh air and was a genuine enjoyment to stop by Redwall Abbey for a visit. So I do think that there are books later in the series that I really enjoyed a lot as a kid.
I kind of want to just turn my camera and show that thing, but I don't know if I should.
My shelf?
Yeah.
Oh, I have all 22 novels on the shelf over there. I picked this book for Tori, and then when I did, I was like, I'm gonna read through the whole series, because I actually have not read through the whole series. I kind of fell off once I got into kind of late high school, and there were books published long after I stopped reading the series. So I did really enjoy this series or books in this series as a kid, and I'm surprised at how much I do enjoy it as an adult. I think this book in particular, I read through in, 2 days, maybe 3 days. And that was with a 9 to 5 work schedule. So Tori's showing you.
I'm just showing off.
That's the fun fact. That's the it's not actually the first edition, but it's one of the first printing covers, and so I like the cover the most on that one. That's the cover I remember reading as a kid. But now they have a paperback, which I have, that has a different cover, and I don't like it as much.
Shall we show for comparison?
Sure, yeah. That's the paperback version. And
he's so cute, though.
He is pretty cute, but I think the original that cover, the hardbook cover, I think is top tier. Top tier. So yeah, so I enjoyed it. I'm glad Tori enjoyed it.
Okay, so our final category for books is creativity. So we allot 1 point, and I give this full points because I think that this was a perfect use of the kind of talking animal idea and world. I think it's one of the best instances as far as novels that I've read in regards to like talking animals. I did have a question, and I don't know if this would be a spoiler, but do humans exist at all in this world?
So, okay, I can answer that question. So here's your Redwall lore.
Okay.
So in the first book, it is implied that they are animal-sized and there are human-sized things like the horse and the cart, for example.
Right.
However, in the rest of the series, those kinds of allusions to humans' presence is gone. So it's to my understanding, and quote me if I'm wrong, Redwall fans, but it's my understanding that Brian Jacques wrote this as if the animals were taking place in the human world, but then in the rest of this series, it's like he kind of retconned it, and they are taking place in their own world.
Okay.
So
no,
there are no humans.
There are no human characters
No,
that appear.
there are absolutely no human characters, and I think the inference in the rest of the series is that this is a world where humans don't exist.
Okay.
But what I do like about that is in the sense that humans don't interact with these animals, and they cannot interact with these animals. But I do like how at the end of the story, they tell you that you should stop by for a visit if you're ever passing by. So
yeah, I think that's cute. So yes, 1 point out of 1 for creativity for me.
Alrighty. So I actually gave this half a point out of 1 for creativity. Again, I was trying to be as objective as I could. So I think the story is very creative, and it is a bit of a literary or fantasy staple for middle school aged kids. I definitely think it deserves credit for being, a very high quality work of literature when compared to entertainment or like kids' books, and has a higher level of intelligence and encourages young readers to rise to the challenge of literary works. I didn't give it full points because I do think it does have a lot of similarities in its composition and its content for stories like Narnia, Miss Frisbee and the Rats of Nim, Watership Down. Those sorts of stories where we are seeing from an animal's perspective and they have human-like emotions and qualities, but they are living in their own world. We are entering into their world. So I think Miss Frisbee and the Rats of Nim, which is a book I have not read, but I do remember seeing clips of the film that was produced by John Bluth. I think it was John Bluth. But so, and I know it came out around a similar time as Redwall. So I'm not saying that there is any, stealing of intellectual property here by any means. Their stories are very different. I think this Frisbee and the Rats of Nim takes place in a world where humans do exist. Like that's the whole point of their environment. But those types of stories have been around for a long time. You even mentioned, I didn't even think about it, but you even mentioned the Robin Hood is the classic Disney Robin Hood. He's a fox. All the animals are anthropomorphized. Animals are playing human-like characters. And so that concept is not new, and I don't think this story has to have invented that concept to gain credit for creativity. But in my view, I did think that there are a lot of similar aspects in this book that we do find in children's fantasy novels and in fantasy novels in general. Animals in fantasy, just the Chronicles of Narnia. Reepicheep is a warrior mouse, and that book came out in the 1950s.
Yeah.
So, which I know that's Prince Caspian and not The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, but okay.
But it's all Narnia.
Don't come at me. I know my Narnia. But I do feel like this story tells stories that kids are naturally drawn to and captivated by without taking your 6th graders straight to J.R.R. Tolkien. that book is dense. The Lord of the Rings books are dense and heavy, and a middle schooler may not be ready for that caliber. But I think this story is a great predecessor, or to kind of like have them, wet their taste buds and see if this is the kind of story that they like. And yet it gives them a good introduction into kind of the fantasy literature as well. So it's not 100% new, but I think it's definitely iconic for a young audience. And I think the Redwall fandom is pretty niche. I haven't been, since the internet, you can find a fandom for everything. And I don't think there's a ton of fans that have a lot of online presence, probably because they're just reading the books. But I also think that since there have been so many adaptations since this book was written,
there has to be an audience for it.
There's an audience out there. So I didn't give it full points. I think it absolutely could earn full points, but I was trying to be a little more like critical and objective and trying to let my like glasses be rose colored. So that's why I gave it half credit.
All right.
So what was your final score for Redwall?
My final score is 8 out of 10.
Wow. I'm very surprised. My final score is 7.5 out of 10.
Pretty close.
So we're pretty close. I actually thought about adjusting my score and giving 2.5 for characters, and then we would have had matching scores, but I didn't.
Okay.
So. Alrighty. Any final thoughts before we move into some lightning round questions?
I'm good.
All right. Let me pull up our lightning round questions. All right. So who is your favorite and your least favorite character?
My favorite character is Warbeak.
I'm surprised.
I like her.
I'm surprised. I thought you were going to pick Constance.
I was until I met Warbeak. So.
Who is your least favorite character? Do you want to tell you mine while you're thinking?
Yeah.
Okay, my favorite character is I'll hold off for this one. My favorite character is Martin the Warrior, but after him would be Matthias because he's not really a character in this book. So then I would say Matthias is probably my favorite character, although Basil Staghair is pretty up there and Jess Squirrel is up there too. My least favorite character is Chicken Hound. So he would be my least favorite.
Can I just lump all of the rat captains into one and say they're my least favorite?
Yeah, you can, but I want you to pick one.
1 second, please.
Which is the one that dies in the tent?
Yeah, that's the one
That's the one you're gonna pick?
Out.
Yep. I forgot to say this in my characters, but I love how the Abbey characters are not naive and stupid.
Yeah.
Like, when the Clooney's gang tries to trick them, they're like, this is definitely a trick. We're not falling for this one.
It was Cheese Thief.
Cheese Thief?
Yep. Him.
Cheese Thief.
Also, don't steal my cheese.
Yeah. Don't touch a mouse's cheese.
Yeah.
It's not a good move. All right. Do you have a favorite side character? So, like, it doesn't have to be your... Like, I would say, like, Warbeak is a pretty main character. Mm-hmm. Is there, like, one of the minor characters that would be your favorite?
Would you consider Methuselah to be
a
side character?
You can count him.
I liked him.
Yeah.
I liked him.
He's pretty good.
I got very upset.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When he died.
Spoilers. Yes.
We said that at the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty sad. Yeah. I think my favorite side character... So one of my favorite side characters is actually Sayla, because I think she's so interesting. You don't know if she's good or bad. Mm-hmm. And then you're like, oh, I don't like this fox. So I think she was probably one of my favorite, because I think she's just very intriguing. But I also like... Is it Ambrose Spike that's in the cellar?
The hedgehog.
Yeah, I like him.
Mm-hmm.
He's down in the cellar.
Yeah, I think my second pick may be Captain Snow, the owl.
He's good too.
He was a neat side character.
Captain Snow was pretty good. And I like the horse because the horse survived.
Yeah.
The unnamed horse. Who do you think is a better villain, Clooney or Asmodeus?
Well, Asmodeus is not present a lot. Mm-hmm. And I think he's just being a snake. Like, you know what I mean? So I'm not going to pick him. I'm going to say Clooney. Clooney had definitely way more of like an evil motivation.
True.
So
I think Asmodeus, because I think he's scarier than Clooney, because he just has you can't reason, because he's just a snake.
Yeah.
He's just straight predator. I think he's a better... Now, I think objectively for the story, yes, but I think Asmodeus, you could argue that he's like scary. I think he's scarier.
Like even Clooney would be afraid of him.
Yeah, exactly. So I think he's like top tier scary villain.
Yeah.
So I'd pick him. Okay, are you in the story? I kind of put this on teams here. There's not really teams, but are you team Matthias on his quest? Or are you team Abby during the siege?
That's hard. I'm gonna say team Abby defense.
Yeah. I'm gonna say team Matthias.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah. Yep. What food from Redwall would you want to try?
Like Mr. Formal says, vegetable soup, please. I want to try cornflower's vegetable soup. Because I just love the way Formal says it. So that's my pick.
Yep. Toss me the book. I'll have to look. I don't even remember. I wrote these questions and I don't even remember what's in the book. There we go. I remember...
There's so many foods.
There are so many foods.
The fish from the beginning sounded pretty
I
good,
know.
too.
I was going to say, I feel like there is some kind of cake or sweet that they talk about, which sounds really good. Mm-hmm. But I also would like to try any of the drinks from the cellar. Would do that. But yeah, the grayling at the beginning, the fish, sounds really good too.
Yeah.
So I think they know how to cook in Redwall. I would eat any of the food. Alrighty. If you were a character in Redwall, what kind of animal do you think you would be?
Oh, I'm the frog that sits in that one scene and watches some of the, I don't even remember which characters, like run by, and he just stays where he's at, and they don't mess with him, and he doesn't have a name. He's just there. I'll be the frog in the meadow.
You would not be a frog, because they're in later books and they're different.
Okay, well then maybe you should tell me what kind of animal I would be.
No, you just pick them. You can pick the frog.
I picked wrong.
Okay. You can pick the frog. It's okay.
Okay.
You can pick the frog.
I picked the frog.
Well, the frog is really boring. I don't think that's on brand for you.
I don't think frogs are boring.
Well, but the way you described it,
okay.
He's
just uninvolved.
He's just chill and sitting there. So he's just a chill guy, is what you're saying. You would just be chill.
Guy.
Okay, just watching them.
Yeah, I'm like the chill guy meme.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Fair. Okay, you can be the frog.
Yay!
I don't know. I think I would be... it's hard to say. I think I might be an otter.
Okay.
I think I might be an otter.
That's not what I thought you were going to pick. But
what did you think I was going to pick?
I thought you were going to pick something like, I don't know, like the badger or like the hedgehog or like something like that. That's like a more offensive animal. But
I think badgers are... Well, badgers are... I would say they're more offensive. The hedgehogs, they just curl up in little...
That's true.
Little
That's
balls.
true.
I think I would be more like an otter. Or... I don't think I'm as, like, rambunctious as a hare. So I don't think I would be a hare. I could kind of see that if I'm in, like, a jaunty mood or something. But I think maybe an otter.
That's fair.
Although I feel like they're a little bit more even-keeled than I am.
What was the otter's name? Winifred?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the otters are kind of like... They're kind of like sailory, piratey kind of characters. Mm-hmm. I would want to be an otter. They're pretty cool.
Yeah.
And they're kind of big and like tough.
Yeah.
I feel like I'd be one of the bigger animals because I'm so tall.
Yeah.
So
that's fair.
But yeah. Alrighty. So based on your impression of this first book, would you continue reading the series?
So I kind of talked about this a little bit in my personal taste and preference. I want to say yes. But I am genuinely intimidated by the number of books that are out there.
But just in general, like the appeal of the series.
Yes, I think the appeal is there. Yes. The commitment, don't know. But the appeal, yes.
Yeah. I would also say yes. So, because I have all the books on my shelf right there. You can't see them because we're not going to turn the camera. But they're there. And then what kind of story would you want to read next in the Redwall world? You can look at the titles, but they're not going to help you out much.
I know this character's name.
Nobody can see what you're talking about.
Matameo. Because he, spoilers, is Matthias's son.
Yep.
So I know that name, and this is the place that they live. Mossflower.
Mm-hmm.
All of these other words. Oh, I know this name. Martin the Warrior.
Mm-hmm.
Everything else looks new to me.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm gonna pick one that looks.
Oh, I was just gonna say if you kind of like imagined your own story, but you can pick one off the shelf.
Oh, what if I just said I'd like to read? I would like to see what happens to all of the side characters when they go back home, the ones that don't live at the Abbey. Characters like Basil Staghare and the squirrels and the church mouse family and stuff like that. Give me a book that focuses in on one of them. That's what I would say.
Do you want me to spoil something for
Sure.
you? The church mouse family moves into the Abbey, and so does Basil. He stays with the Abbey.
Oh, okay.
So they get to join the club.
Okay, cool.
Cool. I'm not going to answer the question because I know what comes next, and I feel like I would just spoil things. Okay. So I think I'll tell you some of my favorite books, some of my recommendations, or at least the ones I remember being my favorite when I was a kid. Mossflower, which is book 2 in the series. It's up there. Martin the Warrior, obviously. That one is really good. There's a book called Tagarung, which is really good. It's about an otter. And I don't remember a lot of details, but for some reason I really liked these books and I read them more than once. Marl Fox I really liked. And The Outcast of Redwall I really liked. And Triss. And I think Triss was the most recent book that I read. I read it I remember when it came out. I think I listened to the audiobook. But so those are my like highlight ones that I remember. But I did not read all of them in order. I had to read them from the library, so I was only able to read the ones the library had in stock. So those were the ones that the library had, and I got to read. And then I had a friend of mine that gifted a few books to me because she had the collection, and she was like, "I'm moving, and here you can have these books." And I felt like she just gave me like gold.
Yeah.
So, alrighty. Any final thoughts about Redwall?
I'm good.
I feel like this is one of the first. It's not one of the first, but I feel like this is not one of the first topics I've introduced you to, but I feel like this is one of the first like of my childhood topics that I've introduced you to.
I don't know. Yeah. I'd have to go back and look.
Because we did the Pacific, but that wasn't. I saw that as an adult.
Mm-hmm.
Don't let your child watch that. That is graphic, but
it's a war.
It's a war movie. So. Alrighty, well, thank you guys so much for joining us on this episode. We hope you had a good time. We know we did. We always do because we're best friends.
Yeah.
If you'd like to suggest something you would like us to review next, you're welcome to do so. You can get in touch with us on our social medias, our website, YouTube comments, Spotify has comments. Who knew? So you can connect with us then, suggest something you'd like us to review next. If you liked this podcast, please like this video, leave us a 5-star review if you can. It just helps us connect with more listeners, helps us know any feedback on the episodes that you guys have. If you want to review our show notes, you can find them, our content links, past episodes, all that fun stuff on our website, lionandmousepodcast.com. You can always reach us there. We also have a suggestion box embedded in our website there if you want to make a suggestion for us as well. Thank you guys so much for listening. We will catch you in the next one.